Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about systems and layoffs. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, is a software engineering if a software engineering company survives even after a large number of people leave, does it essentially mean that the systems built by the teams are extremely robust and fail-safe? No, well, yes and no. So I think that we need to sort of outline a little bit what because this question sort of to me indicates that this person may not be someone who's working in the industry or may not know so much about sort of the heart and soul of how software sort of works. So, uh, guys, if your computer crashes or does something unintended, like your program crashes or there's a bug or something like that, that's not technically the computer's fault. It is that the software developer has made a mistake somewhere, or there's something going on that isn't really, up to the computer. There are absolutely cases where this might happen, but as a general rule, a system is not necessarily well built and robust and fail-safe if it keeps on working just because nobody maintains it. So when a company lays off a large number of people, what usually happens is just that these systems, they're usually maintained by someone. And I'm not saying that there's like tons of programmers, but you're basically, it's almost like saying, think of it this way, it's like asking if your toaster, if the company who makes that toaster goes under and fires all the people who built it, is your toaster now broken? Well, no, it's not. It's the same thing with any service, for example, where if if one of these large companies fires like half their company, well, the servers that are running all the code, they're probably still going to be up and running because they are not they're not laying, removing the products. They are just laying off the people who may be developing or filling some function within the company. And so those systems will still work just as they were intended and designed, but they will not continue being developed. Well, it depends on, of course, who you're firing, why you're firing them, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, your code is still going to work. The systems are still going to continue doing the thing they are doing, even if nobody's owning the software development for those sort of systems. So some systems, guys, they are so old and unmaintained that they were built like a really long time ago, and nobody's really changing the code. It's just something that it's a program basically that just runs for forever, and people just consume it as any product. And most IT companies have a need to continue their development or create new digital systems and offerings and things like that. That's why you need all the people. When you're actually changing something, you're adding something or something similar to that. And then you really only need maybe a few ops people. It depends on the size of the system, of course, but you're not, the cost of maintaining is like nothing in comparison to the cost of development usually. So when a company has a bunch of layoffs, it's really just a question of what projects do they want to continue working on, how can they shuffle around the responsibility of these various systems. And it's really not more complicated than that. Usually I find though that there are absolutely systems that are really poorly made, poorly maintained. The cost that you usually pay when you lay off a large amount of people is that, well, it's not really, I would say, so much a question of that it's not going to work. It's the question of, if you lay off the wrong people, that's going to hurt your company quite a lot. If you lay off the right people, you're going to save a bunch of money, because the sad truth about a lot of software companies is that they're not making a lot of money from their digital systems. And the reason why that is because it's extremely difficult to, one part, measure how much money are you getting out of a thing, especially when you're doing like a lot of different projects, and actually looking at the money value that you're getting from it. Because how do you measure, for example, the productivity of, say, some workers in your company? How do you measure, unless you're selling something or you have like a subscription or some monetary value tied into the system that you have, it's actually very difficult to sort of look at, okay, how much am I getting from this? But it is possible, and that's what is usually what these larger companies do. When they look at, the cost value ratio between like all the different systems they have and what they want to achieve, and if they see that a department or something like that is very costly, or they're not making enough money, or they have some other lead on something that might make them more revenue, it's better for them, quote unquote, to just shut the whole thing down, because trying to figure out who is a real performer and who's not a real performer is very difficult. They still try to do that, and usually what happens is that they have like the pyramid just goes upwards, right? They have managers, sub-managers, middle manager, etc., etc., who they will talk to and say, all right, you get this amount of budget to keep people on staff or keep people on hand, unless they like shut down the whole company, right? Figure out who needs to stay and who needs to go, and then basically becomes a priority system. It's like they just start laying people off, and usually it is based on either labor laws or how valuable the managers who are closest to like these different departments, how valuable they feel that the different software developers are, etc., etc. But these people can still maintain these systems. The thing that is tricky, as I said, is if you fire the wrong people, if you find that one of those systems needs to be maintained, or you want to keep those systems, or you want to continue developing it, or so forth and so forth, you sort of start over the whole process of teaching your staff how the system, like onboarding the people with these new systems. Sometimes it's a very common, guys, that you lose a lot of information when these things happen, and you always have to account for that, because if you, as the classic one, if you fire the wrong person and then nobody knows how this thing works, and now you have to hire them back as a consultant or try to do something silly like that, because you simply don't know how to continue doing this thing, which is the key element here. But the systems themselves, they're not necessarily good just because they continue working. It's just the question of that's the nature of code. It doesn't just fail magically because there's nobody who owns it. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually when IT companies fire a lot of people, it has very little to do, and like the systems just continue working, it has very little to do with that they're like very good systems or things like that necessarily. It's more a question of that the deployment and maintaining of code is actually very simple. Usually, I mean, today it's actually quote unquote as simple as if you have the source code or the the program that is going to run. If it's a web server, for example, if you can put that thing on in a Docker container or on a VM or something like that, I mean, it depends on what type of strategy you're using, of course, and you can run the infrastructure, you have money, basically, at the end of the day, and you have all the surrounding systems and so forth, because the development is what you have all these people for. So if the development it's very costly and you're not making a lot of money from your product, you can actually just fire a bunch of people and move around like responsibility and ownership and stuff like that. And it's not going to make a gigantic difference to the software you already have. It's the future software, or like the fixing of bugs, or like all the actual work that is necessary in terms of like development, that is going to take a hit. And it's also, as I said, a little bit of a risky move sometimes when you do mass layoffs, because you really have to figure out who knows what, because usually in a large organization it's very difficult to figure out, to know all of the things. Like, it's a network of people who together as a collective, it's almost a little bit like an ant hill or something like that. The system, all the ants, they together make up the system, and they all have some knowledge of the system and some pieces of the systems that they are maintaining. So if you fire too many people or the wrong nodes in this little network of people, you will lose a lot of domain knowledge and a lot of information. In some cases, those are it happens all the time. time. You fire the wrong person, nobody knows how this works, and now you have a really big problem, because now you're actually not able to, now you're actually losing money because this product can't be maintained, or you can't develop it further. And usually what happens is that when you do things like this, you do knowledge transfers, it's a very common term, you always lose something along the line. You always initially slow down, but as I've said 100 times, guys, code is just code. At the end of the day, it can be built again. So no one is truly indispensable. Usually, it's just a matter of can you afford the delays and the cost and so forth, and do you have in some cases, do you have the necessary talent of other people who can take the place of someone who's too critical to the company. And that's why the sort of mass layoffs can be very risky. Have a great day.